In this session, we discuss failures when working with siblings, confronting the therapist's anger, and giving permission to stretching your therapy style. Welcome to the AFTA podcast. I am Naveed Zamani and I am your host. In this session, I'm excited to be speaking with Dr. Karen Lewis. Dr. Karen Gail Lewis has been an MFT for over 50 years. She's a longtime member of AFTA. She's also the author of books on adult siblings, single women, marriage, gender communication, and group therapy. And she also presents nationally and internationally on these same topics. She runs unique retreats for siblings and study groups for therapists learning to work with siblings. It's great to have you back, Karen. This season, I'm asking interviewees for a story about a time in their clinical practice that they feel like they failed and what they learned. So I'll turn it to you, and excited to hear some of your stories.
And where do I start? You can't be practicing 54 years without having a lot of failures or learning opportunities.
Right.
I think since a lot of my work nowadays is specifically on adult siblings, I think I want to start with those examples. As I say, I have so many, but I'll start with those. In fact, in my most recent book, the one that is teaching siblings teaching therapists, family therapists, how to work with adult siblings, I have a section on failures, which was really painful and relieving to write at the same time. Can I give a call out to Sandra Coleman?
Always.
An AFTA member who years ago wrote a book called Failures in Family Therapy. It was the first time that anybody that I knew of, that that was probably in the 80s. And after that, there were smaller things that came out about failures, but her whole book was Failures in Family Therapy. And it was very, particularly for any new therapists who are listening, it's very relieving to know that it's okay and that everyone does it. My first encounter, and even before Sandra Coleman, was David Rubenstein. This was way back, probably in the 70s, when family therapists, there were no schools. It was before there were a lot of schools set up, the distinguishing schools, and many of the pioneers went around the country and trained small groups of family therapists. So I was in Boston, in Cambridge at the time, and I was watching David Rubenstein, whom most people have never even heard of him, but he was one of the early ones who just never made a big name for himself. And I was watching him do a session, and the wife said, "What did you just say? I don't understand you."
To the therapist?
To David, yes. And I am watching this, and I said, "Oh, how wonderful. I'm ADHD. I have a word retrieval problem. It doesn't come out of my mouth the way I always want it to. And here is this big shot saying to this woman, that what he said didn't make sense. And he acknowledged it didn't make sense, and he repeated it. And I felt so relieved that we don't have to be perfect. It's not always going to come out right. Let's hope that clients will call us on it, so if they don't understand, they'll ask. So that's my early starts with failures, and getting relieved in having them. Let's see, which one do I want to talk about? There was a brother and sister who came to me, adults, because they were not having problems talking together. And in the first session, it didn't make a lot of sense. I mean, it sounded really simple. I couldn't get them into anything meaty. It was just, she said this and he said that, and they just wanted to hear each other better. But as they're talking, it becomes clear that there is a sibling who had died in a fire that he had started that burned up the house and killed parents.
Wow.
There was one sibling who didn't join. The oldest one didn't join because the problem initially was just between these two. So and they talked a lot about this. I mean, how they went, and I can't remember right now how they went from talking about, well, you said this. Oh, is that what you meant? Well, that's no problem. And they sorted out. It moved into talking about their feelings about this brother who died and who was responsible for the destruction of their home and their parents. Right. And they're very teary, and they say they've never been able to talk about that with their older sister. So I said, do you want to invite your sister next time to ask if she would like to come join us? Now, that would make sense, wouldn't it? I mean, there was nothing wrong with asking that.
That's a reasonable.
They did.
Follow.
The sister agreed to come. I asked why she came, because I always do that. And she said, because they asked me to. And I said, okay. And so we started talking about that. And the session went on. The session ended, and I get an email saying, we're never coming back. My oldest sister was very upset that we talked about this. And you were horrible.
Wow.
And we're never coming back. I thought I was doing the right thing by saying to the older one, do you know why you're here? I assumed they had told her, which apparently they hadn't. She participated in the conversation, even though she didn't want to, and I wasn't picking up. Without a video, I can't go back and see what I didn't pick up.
Right.
But clearly, I should have, if nothing else, when she said they asked me, that's why I came, I should have said something more, I guess. But it was really very, very painful. What did I learn? Yeah,
I was going to ask about that, Karen. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it sounds like, if I'm hearing you correctly, you were in this conversation with two siblings out of four, one of them deceased. The other one has a hard time talking about this topic. They're there to talk about the topic.
Mm-hmm.
Then you very reasonably, I think many of us would do the same thing, say, would you want to bring your sister to talk about it here?
Yeah.
They bring her. And then some sort of invisible set of politics are occurring where then you're in a direct conversation with them, doing what you would normally do, and then they leave and they're like, that was the worst, we hate you. And it's so unclear what went wrong. So I don't even know how you would learn anything from that, because it's so unclear what happened.
The thing that I can pick up the most is, because it was such a horrendous issue, and they'd never talked about it before. I probably should have had them talk about what it was like to talk about it first.
Start with the
Don't know for
process.
sure. But that's one of the things I can think of.
Some scene setting, kind of talking about what it's like to even be in the room. Is that what
yes, and to talk about your brother, and to talk about the feelings. Is this even okay? What I did know is they had never talked together. I did ask that. That should have. Who knows if I should? That might have been a clue that that the two who started it were eager to talk about it. But if they had never talked together and they'd never talked to the other one, it's really hard. Sometimes it's so clear what your mistakes are. And I'm starting with one where, because it happens to all of us, where we don't know what the mistakes are.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And I can only guess and about it. I wrote a very, I think, thoughtful and apologetic letter to each of them afterwards, and said I could certainly understand that they would have been very upset about having to talk about this when my understanding was that the sister knew that's what we were going to talk about. Obviously, I misunderstood that. I took full responsibility. Whether it's true or not, it would make them feel better, I thought. Yeah. And I know nothing more about them.
Yeah. Well, I wonder too if it's hard too in those experiences because people like kind of go on and you never know what happened next, and you never know if like you're a stepping stone to a larger part of a journey that they're on, or kind of like what your impact ends up being. So the relationship to uncertainty feels important there.
Yes, and it leaves a uncomfortable feeling. But I have another example that comes to mind as you were just saying that, when you said you never know what happens later. I was asked to do a consult for a woman who had been depressed and been in therapy for a while and wasn't getting anywhere. And so the therapist colleague asked me would I do a consult to maybe new eyes could be helpful. So the woman was, she was depressed. She wasn't, she was working. She was married. They'd been talking about having kids, but she didn't want to. And she was in the same job and wasn't making any progress, wasn't moving ahead. She was just depressed in all parts of her life. So when she comes in, one of the things that I assume all family therapists, I hope, are learning is if what you've done before or what has been done before hasn't worked, don't do it again. So do something new. So I did something new. I wasn't going to ask her about her depression. I wasn't going to do anything because she'd already been doing that with this therapist for a long time, and it was a good therapist. So I said, do you have any siblings? And she said, yes. I have one. I said, tell me better. Why? I don't know. Just tell me better. Okay. She was probably relieved that I wasn't going to talk about so she told me her sister was, I think her language was, I think she used the word handicapped. I know nowadays we try to be very polite about this, but I'm going to use her language. Okay. Her sister was handicapped, emotionally handicapped. And what does she do? You know, she just sits all day and she watches TV. Now, the way I'm going to say this next thing sounds really cruel, but I did the best I could to make it not sound cruel. After I asked about a lot of other things, I said, would making yourself shorter make your sister taller?
What an interesting question.
And she snapped and said, but at least she wouldn't feel bad for being so short. She was furious at me and walked out of the session.
Oh, wow. She like stormed out.
Stormed out. And when people storm out, I don't charge them.
Fair enough. Reasonable.
So she stormed out, and about a month later, 2 months, I can't remember, I get a call from her therapist who says, you know, she said it was an awful session. She hated it. It was a waste of her time, and she was furious at me for sending you to her. But, you know, Karen, it's really interesting. She actually asked for a promotion at work, and she and her husband are now planning on having a child. So the session was failure. When you said a minute ago, Nivi, that you don't know what happens afterwards, here's one time when I did get to know what happened afterward. It actually turned out, I don't know, maybe I had nothing to do with it. Or maybe that making yourself smaller, will that make your sister taller, may have clicked in some unconscious way and unhooked her. And
Sorry, please, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was going to say, I have a term for that I use for that. I call it unhealthy loyalty. It's a loyalty to a sibling that's so important. I mean, loyalty to siblings that you care about, even if you don't care about them, but the loyalty is there. But it's an unhealthy loyalty because it is holding yourself back at the expense of to help the other one look bigger, be more successful, not look so bad. If I've got a trouble acting out brother, I'll act out more so that his behavior won't look as bad compared to mine. There are all kinds of ways it shows up. And once I identified that, probably it took me years before I had a term for it. I mean, I kept seeing it. Since I've seen it now, I probably see that in more than half of the clients that I meet with now. And I think that unhealthy loyalty may have been what clicked for her unconsciously and freed her a bit. But, we therapists like to take credit for changes. We have no way of knowing what happens afterwards.
Right.
But so yeah. I think I was probably really harsh on her, which was not good, but it may have been useful. Don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like, I appreciate what you're saying about taking credit and ultimately we don't know. And for the sake of conversation, well, I also think perhaps taking credit is maybe one of our own coping strategies to do the work. Otherwise, it'd be really hard.
Yeah, we don't get marks at the end, grades at the end.
Yeah, they just leave and they're like, okay, good luck. But it strikes me that in that moment, correct me if I'm wrong, like you were noticing some ways that she was talking about her relationship to her sister and wanting to challenge it a little bit or kind of like disrupt it, if I'm interpreting correctly.
Possibly, or it was too close. I don't know. I mean, that what you said is as good as a guess as any.
Yeah, I just bring that up because I guess that's something that I've been thinking about so much is like how do we challenge clients? I don't know. Let me back up. I've had this general worry, just anecdotal observation that therapy has become extremely validating or like validation becomes a central part of the work. And I don't know, I talk about this with my students. I'm like, well, if you want to validate, like ChatGPT does that really well. Like they don't need to pay you to do that. And so I just, it's a broader question I've been holding about how do we challenge clients in ways that supports connection, but also encourages them in various ways to look at something differently. I just feel like there's also a cultural context we're in right now where I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. Something is like shifted around our ability to challenge. This is my own experience.
I grew up the only girl, the youngest and the only girl. I was this goody two shoes. It's disgusting when I think about it now. In a family, sort of like every other family that was, it's dysfunctional. Isn't every family like mine? Isn't my family more unusual than everyone else? Oh no, my family is just as dysfunctional as all other families. We still love each other and whatnot. So I never even heard a swear word. I grew up in the South, so I never heard a swear word either. So it was very polite and whatnot. Anyone who's worked with me would be surprised to hear that. Because when I have siblings, and I've worked with as many as 10 siblings at a time on this virtual screen. But when I have siblings who are screaming at each other, and I'm going to talk about, my work now is all virtual. So it's easier to use examples more recent rather than in my office. So when I have siblings who are screaming at each other, I will scream louder. to say, stop, stop, stop. That doesn't work. I put my hand in front of the camera. And usually at some point they notice that I've disappeared. My hand is there. They can't see me. And is it polite? I mean, should we therapists be screaming? But clearly I have joined them by screaming. But at the same time, I think I hope, I wouldn't do this if I didn't hope it had a benefit of saying, when two people, I usually start with, did you know that when you're being screamed at, two things happen? Your ears close because you don't like screaming, and you're not listening because you're busy thinking about how you're going to respond.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you're clearly not being heard, I often get screaming back at me. She doesn't, he doesn't. Can you lower it so I can hear you? So I've come up with a phrase that I actually use a lot in saying, helping siblings say, I really would like to hear what you have to say. So can you say it in a different way so I can understand, so I can hear you and understand?
Mm.
That's not easy. I say that a lot. It takes a long time before they're able to do that. But I think I'm not sure, what other therapists would do with clients who are just screaming in front of them. Maybe they'd be quiet. I don't know. But that doesn't seem to be very helpful, to be quiet and let it go on.
Right.
I have a workshop. Speaking of failures, I have a workshop I want to do for a CEU, for any training program, for anyone. And it's called, it's on anger, your client's anger at each other, your client's anger at you, and your anger at your clients. It can only be done in person. I would only do this in person. It's much too personal otherwise. And no organization has said, we don't do things in person usually, but we'll set it up. No one has been willing to give me an opportunity. Therapists don't learn how to deal with anger. And so if we're going to talk about failures, how about all the failures of when we have not dealt with our anger appropriately? Yeah. There's an article in was it the Networker or the Family Therapy News? I forget which, one of the two. A couple of years ago, about someone who talked about anger, and I was so excited to read, a therapist was excited to read about anger, but they talked about how they interpreted the anger back to the client.
What does that mean?
That I'm wondering if you're really feeling this kind of thing, looking at it in terms of a transference, or you're really able to express your anger at me when it really belongs over there. Nowhere in that article did it say what the therapist did with how it felt to be yelled at.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the very first, no, it wasn't my first workshop, but an early workshop that I did years and years ago was called, but ... but don't tell my supervisor.
That's so good.
I had an individual woman who was, today she would call, I don't use diagnoses, but today she would be called borderline. And she was screaming at me. And she'd been putting me down and screaming at me. And I was a young therapist and I was doing all the right things and, listening and interpreting and all that other stuff. And at one point I just had it and I screamed at her. You can't talk to me like that. Where did that come from? And she said, yeah, you ready for this? She said, yes, I can. You're the therapist. You have to take it.
Interesting.
She had obviously been in therapy a lot before me, is what I figured out later. I said, I was young. I didn't know much. And I said, no, I don't have to take it. I don't like being yelled at or sworn at.
So I don't want to get
Um,
into too analytical of a place, especially because it's not my story. So just interrupt me or stop me here. But I wonder how useful it might be to be in a I don't know, I'm thinking about people who feel permission to yell at others and how there's something that in that moment you really directly address. Like as an analogy, like people who yell at servers or people that like are helping them with stuff, that they feel like the permission to get overly angry or yell. Um, I don't know. So there's something about like at least the way it's landing for me, like you kind of standing up for yourself. That's an okay phrase to use. That
are
seems like
therapists allowed to? Aren't we supposed to take it all and help you appear very angry at this moment. Tell me about why you're feeling so
yeah,
angry at me.
yeah.
That's how I was trained.
I think it's still a dominant kind of idea in the field.
And I think as therapists, as human beings, for the most part, most of us don't know how to deal with anger very well
Hmm,
in our own personal lives.
right.
So it's safe to be able to stay the therapist and help them deal with the anger rather than be a reflection of, if you treat me like that, what does that say about you? And what does it say about me if I accept it?
Well, and I wonder too if you've been in the face of anger in a particular way too, because at least my experience with siblings is like there's just histories and stories and emotions that run so deep across so many decades that you're probably stepping into just some really hot waters
Yes.
pretty quickly.
Yes. And often with siblings, I become don't like to use these terms, but a stand in for a parent.
Hmm.
Because now I'm sort of the authority. As therapists, we do have a part of authority. We
Right.
charge money. So um, they tell us their problems, we don't tell them ours. So we
Yeah.
do have a hierarchical position. Um, but sometimes I will use that um, and talk about, you know, I'm wondering if it's feeling like just recently I was able to say, I think I just became your mother. This is the time when I caught that what I had just done, I had just told this one something and this one something, and whoops, you know, you were you were just talking about this, and I think I just became your mom when I was saying that to each of you. And is that what it felt like when you were? And then I did take it back to them. Is that what it felt like? That mom was caught in there with the two of them, um, and it turned out to be very helpful. But how long? I'm not sure how long I had been caught in that position before I realized it.
Yeah. Well, and that one, let me know if this is fair. Like that one feels like you are in a family system and noticing that you're now structured into the family system in a way that is useful to acknowledge and think about versus a context like the other story, the previous story you shared, where you're kind of the recipient of some abusive relational practices that doesn't seem like I guess I'm like appreciating what you're saying, or at least how I'm receiving it, that there's context where perhaps a client's anger towards a therapist is like overly intellectualized or like
Mhm.
made into a whole therapeutic process when also perhaps along the way the therapist should also be making clear what's appropriate behavior towards them or not as
Mhm.
just like a fellow human.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think we have to be human. And so part of failure in sessions is also, I think, being acknowledging, I said something, I did something, I'm really sorry. That was really inappropriate of me. Because we, not that we're role models, but we role model good relationships,
Yeah.
the potential for good relationships.
Right.
Uh, you find me any human being who's never made a mistake, and people will joke and say, yeah, he's on the cross and he died,
Yeah.
something like that. But so being able to acknowledge to our clients that, that really wasn't appropriate what I just did.
That really resonates for me. I'm thinking, I don't know if you're familiar with Alan Jenkins' work, but he talks about the parallel journey of becoming ethical with our clients,
Yeah.
and that the relational ethics that we're kind of like in our therapy practice is pretty important in the relational ethics we might hope for our clients being in their other relationships.
Yes. Yes.
Is it okay if I ask another question?
Absolutely.
So I guess also at this juncture, I'm going to ask a question, but if you don't want to answer the question, or if you prefer to go into a story, please do. I'll also share to folks listening, I had the privilege and honor after our last interview of being able to read the book that you've recently published on sibling therapy, and it's just so helpful and so useful. Um, yeah, and so I actually sent our interview to my own sister, and then we're reading it together. It was a kind of a fun little thing to do together.
Oh, how neat.
But I'm also like, I guess what's caught my attention is you're now taking some of the practice and skills that you've used for decades and applying them to a virtual setting. And I wonder if you could speak to that. Like I just was so caught by you, like putting your hand in front of the camera, or like trying to shout, but then even your shouting on a virtual setting is limited by the speaker volume of the client on their side.
Good point.
Um, yeah, so I'm curious how you do find yourself managing or kind of like contending with anger and intense dynamics virtually.
I'm not sure how to answer that. Um, I thought you were heading in another direction before you finished, so I was thinking about where I was going to go.
Go in that
But
direction.
how
Why
do
not?
but let me see. How do in person, I have been known to stand between people who are screaming.
Uh-huh.
There was one family I saw that the father attempted to storm out. This father, who was, I don't know, 6'2". At the time, I was 5'1 3/4". I'm shorter now, but I was 5'1 3/4", and I'm not very big. He was your stereotypical Alaskan man, okay? Big. He got ready to storm out. I ran to the door and stood in front of the door with my back to the door and looked up at him and said, "I really think it's a good idea for you to sit down right now."
Wow. Okay.
But you can do that. I mean, I did do that in person.
Love that.
In virtually, I do sometimes have to yell to get people to hear me so they stop yelling.
Right.
And then what I do is I always come up with, people hear you better if you lower your voice. And then we talk about, I statements and all that other stuff when they can come down enough. But there's some siblings I've worked with who the yelling is not loud, not yelling loud, but it's a wall. It's an absolute wall, and nothing happens. I'm not useful. I can't break in to that.
It sounds almost more difficult.
Yes, and I'm pretty direct. I'm really pretty direct. And if I can't get through, I know that there's, if either I'm really missing something, which is possible, or it's a problem. So what I've far more than one occasion, I've said, it's pretty clear we've been meeting. And I always, with siblings, I don't do this with others, but with siblings, I do say at the end of the third session, you aren't seeing some change, some progress. Even if it's only insight, not necessarily your behaviors, but even just insight. If you're not seeing something by the end of the third session, we got to reassess what's going on here. So when a fifth session comes by and there's still nothing, I can think of a number of siblings where I've said, clearly I'm not being helpful. I've told you what I think is going on because I'm very clear. Here's what I think is going on, where it comes from, because I do believe that the problems that siblings have in adulthood, regardless what the topic is, there's a theme for what the problem is.
Mm.
That theme goes back to early childhood.
Mm.
And I explain this and I show them that this is what I think is blah, blah, blah related to that, blah, 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 whatever. But all my blah, blahs don't work. And so I say, I'm not going to waste your time, your money, or your expectations. It's not working. I can't be of help. I don't know the percentage. I've never thought about it until this moment, but that's the end for some people. And for some, they say either at that point, can we set another appointment, or they call me later and say, can we come back? And by virtue of having done that, for those who call me later, something has shifted. I gave them hope by giving them no hope, maybe. I don't know.
Well, just acknowledging that there really isn't a path forward if we're not going to talk, perhaps.
Or change. I mean, because they were busy talking. Everyone can talk.
Right. Well, yeah, meaningful change.
Right.
If it's okay to share a reflection, Karen, please let me know if it doesn't make any sense. In your stories, what stands out to me is lots of acts of courage, right? Like standing in front of a 6'2" man as a 5'1" person and saying, I think you should sit down, or putting your hand to the camera, or like yelling louder or getting between. And then I'm also thinking about the story you shared when you were a beginning young therapist and being unsure to what degree you could kind of involve your physicality or kind of like push back on some stuff. And yet you did, in that, like the story you shared where the woman's screaming at you and you're like, you can't yell at me like that. Apologies for this poorly formed question, but like, I guess I wonder, how do you make sense of that? Like, how did you become courageous, if that's a fair observation of mine in your work?
I don't know, especially when I told you how I grew up. So I wonder it also. I mean, I certainly wasn't like that at the beginning. Whether I'm very pleased to be ADHD, let me just say. So sometimes I say it must have been, my ADHD. Things just blurt out. But the answer is, it's a great question, Naveed. It's a very, very great question. And my brothers would be very surprised to hear this about me. I don't think my friends would now, but I'm not even sure about my friends. I don't know. That's not how people see me. But and I sure didn't learn it in school.
And
do you have any ideas? If you have some ideas, I am open for hearing.
No, I mean, it's my own. I'm kind of asking it a bit selfishly too, because I think I work in the domestic violence world and I support students working with DV stuff, and I really am encouraging of, one, like what you said, like you don't have to take abusive behaviors from clients, like that's not your role, but also like getting involved in a way that disrupts harmful behaviors or violence feels like a really important stance to take. I'm also like pretty aware that I'm often working with, I'm in like a male body, and I use my physicality a lot, and I can't expect some of my students or trainees or colleagues who are in different shaped, sized bodies to do the same thing, if that makes sense.
You just reminded me of something. When you talked about physicality, Carl Whitaker, one of the people who would come around, and I had dinner with him, and a group of us had dinner the first time I ever met him. In fact, it was I was 23, 24. I just learned this thing about family therapy and had to find some people who were doing it. So I was invited to this dinner. And he's talking about himself. I'm sure, I hope everybody, all people, all therapists, family therapists, get to see tapes of him, videos, and hear about him. He was a big man. I was 23 or whatever. In fact, I biked over to the dinner at nighttime. And he was talking about how he fell asleep, how he falls asleep sometimes with people, and how he tells them off sometimes. I mean, he didn't talk about raising his voice, but he would tell them off. And I'm listening to him and thinking, as I leave, he can get away with that because he's a man. Mm-hmm. He's a man and he's big. Yeah. And I'm 20, little and 20 something, and I can't get a, well, maybe. So that may have given me, some permission to stretch myself outside of how therapists we all are trained. Because I was so struck by him.
Right, that's a nice story. So in some ways, like just kind of the observation of this man kind of sharing some of the stories of, I don't know how you describe it, maybe in various confrontations or kind of stretched practices, maybe noticing that you could stretch as well in your own ways.
Yeah. So why did I have that ability that I didn't know that I had? Because it certainly was different than my childhood. I don't know. We'll have to do some psychoanalysis of me, some other day. But it did give this, and the story I told at the beginning about David Rubenstein that most people have never even heard of. Seeing more experienced therapists step outside my image of what a therapist should look like, touched something in me that allowed me to say, I remember a student I had once, a family therapist, I was teaching in a family therapy program, and she dressed very properly all the time, and she was working with teenagers, and she was having trouble with this one that I was consulting on. And I said, when you go home, do you have a big chair at home? Yeah. Do you ever just sprawl it, flop your legs over the side of the chair and sprawl out? She said, yeah, sometimes. I said, do that. Go home, put on pants, sprawl out over this chair, and think about this teenager. And next week, when there was a suggestion, next week when you meet with him, have that in mind. And she went from being proper to more of who she was at home. So as I'm putting this together, I don't know that I consciously thought of any of this before, but I was basically giving her permission, what Carl Whitaker gave me permission, to find the essence of who you is and use it in a real way. Because when we're real with clients, it allows them to see us and allows them to see other ways of being.
Yeah. That's a beautiful story. Well, and it's just beautiful to hear about all the impact you've had on so many people across your life. So as I'm kind of keeping track on time here, Karen, can I ask you kind of a funny, silly question? So you're saying like we maybe need to psychoanalyze me. In that story of like trying to wonder about courageousness in your life, if I was you, for the sake of conversation, would I then be asking you after following that, would I say, like, would I be then curious about your siblings and maybe invite your brothers to come?
You should. Yeah. You absolutely should.
Because you said my friends wouldn't be surprised, but my brothers might be. And perhaps that's like an interesting thing.
Yeah. And off the cuff, if you were me asking me this question, or if you were you asking me this question, I would start out by saying, oh, it doesn't have anything to do with my brothers. But I wouldn't let it go there. I'd say, well, tell me about your brothers.
I see.
And one was very fluid with his words and anger. And the other was like So not surprisingly, not. More quieter. So we have the noisy one, the quiet one, and then the good little girl. Okay? I'm just putting this together now, but I might be telling you, if you pushed me enough, and I would probably try to divert you as much as I could because I don't have an answer. But if you push me enough, I might say, well, he was freer than I was. My older brother. I didn't like the way he did it, but he was freer. My younger brother was not free. And now as an adult, and we're all in our 80s. So we've evolved and grown in all kinds of ways.
Right.
But in our teen years and, young teen, and then even the early 20s, my middle brother did not use his freeness. He was not as open with being free. He did his freeness on the side, so it wasn't noticed as much. So maybe, that gave me somehow permission, together with hearing Carl Whittaker. Oh, I could do that. Even though I'm more than a foot shorter and a lot tinier.
Oh, beautiful. Well, I appreciate you sharing your stories, and I hope folks that are listening maybe are also giving themselves permission and feeling stretched in some of the stories you're sharing. And I really want to encourage folks to go seek out your work and your book. Is there, for folks listening, is there anything you would specifically point them to, or a website or anything, if they wanted to pursue your work?
Yes, and thank you for giving me the opportunity now to say that my website is my name, drkarengaillewis.com. I am doing a lot of I've already said I'm in my 80s. I'm doing a lot of study groups now for teaching therapists how to work with siblings, even though you don't see siblings in your room. Like the woman I told you about, her sister was the handicap. Even if you don't see siblings, there are sibling issues that may be really helpful to you in helping your clients. So if anyone is interested in learning more about this, please, please, please contact me. Surprisingly, it's not unusual to get 3 to 5 requests for help for siblings a week or a day.
Oh.
Some days I get that many.
So there's a lot of...
Not all the time, but it's not uncommon to get, and not all of them come through, but they're clearly, and what they all say when they come to me is, we go online, we look, and there's no one else doing sibling therapy.
Yeah.
And the reason I wrote my book on, what's it called? I'm looking at the title now, Sibling Therapy, The Ghosts from Childhood That Haunt Your Clients' Love and Work. And the reason I wrote that is because there is now a framework that I've come up with over these 54 years that helps understand these sibling issues, whether you're working with an individual, with a couple, with the whole family. So, yes, I'd love to be able to pass this information on, get more people out there doing it.
Fantastic. Thank you so
much. And
you
were such a good interviewer. You really are, Naveed. I just have to tell you.
Very generous. Thank you.
So you must be a great therapist.
Oh, well, you'd have to ask my clients that. As we said earlier, I might give myself a lot more credit than I deserve. So,
but you see, I'm a good therapist, so I can tell that you're...
I'll take that. Thank you. Thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Certainly.
Karen,
this has been fun. Always. Yeah. Great. Thanks. Bye-bye.